Testing, testing, 1, 2. Oh, hey, Carl. It's the good
Hey.
Thursday.
Right. I actually almost forgot I was in like in VC on Bridgemakers with Lau and Jose. Clicked onto YouTube and saw the broadcast go live and was like, oh.
Oh, nice.
I haven't got, this back into my routine, and work's been so weird this past month that I
Oh, really?
was about to go, considering going back to bed like a half hour ago.
Well,
my weekends I stay up late, so I only slept like 4 hours today.
Oh, that's tough. Well, if that drowsiness hits you, I'll understand if you need to log out.
I'm
But
good.
we'll miss you.
Yeah. I had to talk to work about payroll stuff, and that woke me up pretty much right away.
Oh, yeah. Nothing like a little bit of finance to get the cardiovascular.
More like you better fix your punches or you're not getting paid.
Oh, jeez. Hit you right in the pocketbook. Hey,
What up, Katie?
Hello.
Yeah, welcome. We got the stream going, and give it just a few minutes for people to roll in.
Yeah, I also feel like the kid who soft. Sorry, yeah, my wife's asking me about tacos. I kind of feel like the kid who didn't do the homework in class, because I was doing good the first half, keeping up with the chapters.
Oh,
Not
really?
only have I not caught up with the chapters, I didn't even watch last week's broadcast yet.
Wow, you have been really busy then, for sure. Yeah, I'm glad that we are able to, after the live stream, the video stays up. So it's, sometimes I go back and listen to the commentary to the open discussion because it's fun to listen to it again, get those little nuggets of wisdom from everybody.
Yeah, I went back myself and rewatched the whole summit. Most of it.
Ah, fun. Hey, George Braham, welcome.
George.
Howdy. Was that squirrel always there, or is that a new addition? Because that thing was greeting me very enthusiastically.
It's chirping at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. I think there's one around here too. Is he over here?
One up
Yeah,
there
he is. He's on the hill looking at us.
Have you ever seen the rest of this world, George? Or Katie?
No, I haven't looked around.
Oh, you'll have to check it out afterwards. There's a whole squirrel presentation.
Ah.
Yeah, there's some interactive stations. But what was that, KT? Yeah.
I was walking Gracie at the lake, and we came up on the swimming area, and there was a family with 2 or 3 kids, and one of the kids had attracted a squirrel that was being real friendly. I think probably, through feeding. And of course, the squirrel would run if I came near with Gracie. And so I did a wide circle around, and they were oohing and on over Gracie. And I said, I'd come over, but you'd lose the squirrel for sure. And the parents looked at me gratefully because, the kids were so excited over a friendly squirrel. Of course, the squirrel was just getting food.
For some reason, that reminds me of the King Kong movie, where King Kong, saves the human from the big dinosaurs, and you were King Kong in that moment.
Yeah. Either me or Gracie. Gracie's 110 pounds of livestock guardian dog.
My goodness.
Or 120, depending on whether it's winter or summer.
And then probably a lap dog, right? Hey, welcome.
Hey.
Hey.
Oh, it's KT.
Yeah.
I haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, let me go ahead just in time. Actually, I think it's probably a good time to kick off. So yeah, welcome to another book review event of The Body Keeps the Score, our weekly get-together to review the chapters as we go as a community. And I always want to extend a warm thanks for carving out the time to come in and see the presentation and offer commentary. Extending that thanks to anybody that might be on the streams, Discord or YouTube. We're watching for any chat to come up, so feel free to chime in if something comes up out of the presentation or you had a comment about the book, and we'll watch for you to pop a message in there. And as we talk about a very deep and meaningful book about the topic of trauma, we want to do our due diligence to make sure that this is a safe and inclusive space for that type of discussion. So we have some event norms that we promote and adhere to for productive discussion. First and foremost, that we're not a therapy group, no professional therapists here in that capacity to handle like crisis management or that level of difficulty. So if those things do come up, if the book topics and our discussions kind of bring something to the forefront that needs some attention, we really do encourage professional support, through therapy or some of the crisis hotlines. And we would be more than happy to help in that respect with phone numbers, guides, how to find good therapists that are, close to home, that sort of thing. And please no fixing or advising. Some of the shares here can be very personal, and it's we want to be careful not to turn it into a verbal game of ping pong about what we think they should do or how they should feel or how they should approach. Unless that feedback is asked for specifically, unless somebody's open to that feedback. Some of these topics on discussion on trauma can be can bring out shares that are being shared, maybe even for the first time with a group. And it's nice to give those commentaries, those shares, like some space, because it's equally as important to just be heard. We don't always need to fix. Sometimes people just need someone to hold a space for that to have been said, and that can be very deep and meaningful as well. We do also like I and you statement hygiene. We kind of have a culture of softer language here to help, kind of social lubricant, so to speak, for sensitive discussion. So, we want to try to avoid something like, you said this earlier, because that can feel like a little bit of judgment, hostility, and we want to keep this space open for that kind of flow for sensitive things to be talked about. So we really appreciate those kinds of commentary and, also confidentiality. We're not here to gather personal details or gossip or, personally benefit from any way in your presence here. We're just a community of kind of peer-to-peer enthusiasts for mental health. However, keep in mind that we do stream this because we want to we want to allow this event to reach like another audience, if it's possible to, for someone to come across on YouTube and possibly see the live stream. Maybe they're really interested in this topic and they'd like to also participate. So we're kind of trying to build a technology for that to happen, VR and YouTube connectivity. We have a raise hand feature for our open discussion session, but you can always click the squirrel icon up there to raise your hand at any time. And when we do get to that section, it'll be a nice, orderly, moderated discussion. So, if you have something to share, please use the hand raise, and it helps me kind of pass the microphone around. And lastly, we have a Discord, which has a thread for this weekly event. So not only can you maintain news, sign up for reminders, you can also drop weekly commentary, questions, highlights that you want to point out from the book. So we have, the ability to have an ongoing discussion outside of the event as well. And with that, let's jump into Chapter 12 here. So last week we covered Chapter 11, which went very deep into the topic of traumatic memory and the process and the kind of physical biology of how repressing a life-threatening memory works, and how it manifests in these kind of incoherent flashes that don't really have like a narrative to them or a linearity. And Chapter 12 actually kind of stays on that topic with traumatic memory, and kind of talks about a few different aspects of it, and also the kind of social tug of war between whether traumatic memory is admissible in court. That's sort of like a front line that we'll talk about in another slide here. But first and foremost, we've talked about this before, how in a book like this, in an academic setting, a lot of times we sort of tend to focus on the most extreme cases of trauma, because just like science studies like black holes, the most extreme gravitational event like in the universe, and then you kind of walk back with understandings of other things when you gain more and more understanding of this extreme black hole event. And books are the same way. We study combat. We've studied really dark stories of sexual assault, abuse, and neglect. And it's important to kind of keep in mind that traumatic experience doesn't necessarily have to be that extreme sport of, what's the worst thing that can happen to people. Sometimes just being really neglected or emotionally unsupported through our developmental years can program your body to have like a traumatic reaction to kind of benign situations. So always keep in mind, although we talk about combat and world wars and war a lot, it doesn't take combat necessarily to dip a toe into traumatic experience. But with that said, I also want to honor like the serious levels of PTSD that our veterans, foreign wars had to endure and get, treatment for. And, just take a moment to kind of digest like the impact of World War II. We hear about it a lot. World War II can just be, you kind of hear the term and you sort of tune out feeling like, you already know everything you need to know about the World War. What's another fact? I don't have room for more facts in my brain, but, in terms of trauma, it's really interesting to stop and think about the numbers. There were 70 to 100 million combatants in the war over the time frame of the war. Of those combatants, 17 million combatants lost their lives. But the civilian count, in turn, 50 to 55 million civilians are believed to have been lost directly through the World War II combat. And, a lot of secondary causes there too, like just the famine and the loss of infrastructure, not necessarily in the combat itself, but the aftermath and the being surrounded by it is also a cause of many of these deaths. But displacement, if you've seen pictures of those cities after World War II that, looks apocalyptic, almost like an ancient civilization. Nobody can live in those cities. They had to go somewhere else. And, just think of the disruption in somebody's life where you have to flee your city and just find, somewhere to restart, and, maybe multiple times even. Those displacements, 30 million injuries, and these can be serious injuries too, like loss of legs, loss of limbs, loss of eyesight, hearing, these are major life-altering injuries from warfare and the weapons of warfare. It's believed that 5 million people in just the cities or the areas of Bengal and Leningrad alone died of famine, and that's just like a subset of this conflict. And we read personal accounts of the orphans that came from World War II from the UK. Some of the colleagues of Dr. van der Kolk were people that worked with World War II orphans and wrote articles about the effects of parental loss and how that affects development and what kinds of trauma can come from that. So if we run numbers, that's about 300 million people that were affected by that war. And at the time of the war's end, that would have equaled to 13% of the population of the world. is an incredible number to think about. And although World War II is kind of like in black and white and still has that kind of 40s era radio sound to it, it's only a couple generations ago. Like, our parents were raised by the people that fought in that war, by the people that were on the home front, and endured these PTSDs and raised a whole generation with that experience. And then in turn, many of us were raised by people who were raised by that traumatized World War II generation. So just to kind of stop and think for a second of, only being a few generations removed from 13% of the population of the world going through this horrendous traumatic event, and how that, ripples through our society. But one of the themes of this chapter that I think Dr. van der Kolk really wanted to call out was that, we have this kind of where PTSD becomes like an inconvenience to the effort, where, there was this suspension of mental health support during World War II, where there's instances like the British Army suspended all use of the word shell shock in their medical diagnoses. So during the European campaign, they really tried to encourage medical practitioners to not diagnose people with PTSD, or at that time it was called shell shock, because they needed the soldiers to continue the efforts. They had this diagnosis that they would give people, which was like kick the can down the road and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. NYDN, which was not yet diagnosed nervous. What a terrible acronym. And the Germans, they didn't have, even as much civility as that. Like, if you had a case of shell shock and you were refusing to go, out and do the duty, they would actually put you through electroshock treatment to cure, so to speak, this shell shock condition. And to give you, kind of another aspect of the sort of the propaganda side of anti-PTSD is like, in Germany around 1939, they banned the World War I book, All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a very honest account of what life was like in trench warfare during World War I. So now that we've kind of laid out a lot of these factoids and statistics on World War II, like just think about 30 years earlier than that, there was World War I. So yet another, couple of generations of warfare, right there too. So we have kind of two layers going back generations of this kind of warfare trauma. And in 1983, when Dr. van der Kolk was working on various projects with the Veterans Affairs, he kind of noticed this phenomenon. And this is what I think makes Dr. van der Kolk's book really interesting, is these are like personal accounts, like he was the one making these observations, not necessarily always collecting information from books or articles, but like he was in the field, on the front lines of helping people with PTSD. And this was one of his observations, was that people from the World War II generation would, line up and funnel into the medical treatment wing, even though they were diagnosed as having PTSD, they would treat it as a physical ailment. So, if we can think of a lot of the chapters where we talk about the connection between having trauma and it manifesting into like a physical illness, they were likely dealing with those physical manifestations of trauma. And that was kind of how that generation was conditioned to handle those World War II wounds. Whereas the Vietnam War, like everything kind of really changed, and now the mental health wing was, open, and the Vietnam vets were taking advantage of having that kind of mental health support. So every day when people were lining up with these appointments, he could see two completely separate generations, like going to different wings of the veteran support hospital. And I thought that was really an interesting anecdote that he shared in this chapter. But he also called out these eras of like a backlash to progress in treating trauma and PTSD. And, like we pointed out in an earlier slide, that trauma and healing from trauma was not conducive to being a productive soldier. So, the powers that be sort of kind of work around diagnosing trauma and kind of try to push people through it. And, we also had these eras of just really like easily disproven data. Dr. van der Kolk talks about this book called the Comprehensive Textbook of Psychiatry that's back from like the 1960s or 70s. And it literally says in this book that like incest only occurs in 1 out of 1 million people. And that was the chapter where Dr. van der Kolk had like 100 patients that were suffering from a childhood incest experience. So he easily knew just from firsthand experience that number was grossly misaligned with what we see in reality. And it went on even to be as bold as to say that incest is beneficial to the psyche. Like, what? Like, somebody really wrote that and published it. It's incredible. But these are the levels that the pendulum swings to. So, although we feel like we're gaining ground, it can easily have some setbacks by, sort of like who funnels these books out into, university and who writes the diagnoses and the DSM manual. There's levers of power to how people are able to access help. And, one of the areas that is kind of like the front lines of traumatic diagnosis is this concept of false memory that, first when people get discredited for like legal reasons or, cover-up type of reasons. They just get discredited as being untruthful or money seekers or attention seekers. But then when it becomes more credible with like evidence, like photographic evidence in this case, what they'll do is they'll accuse people of having what's called a false memory. And false memory is that concept that, like an attorney through their line of questioning can like implant the memory of the crime that you're accusing someone of. And it's sort of it's the other side of the tug of war with repressed memories. Is when people come in with repressed memories in court testimony, a lot of times this false memory argument is kind of made to combat it. So it's kind of one of those areas where that's like where policy, ebbs and flows one way or the other is depending on where that lands. But we're in an age of like wonderful books that have been published, like Judith Herman's Trauma and Recovery, which is a great read for anybody that's experienced abuse at a young age. In addition to that, like The Courage to Heal, there's a lot of foundational books that have come out in the last 10 or 20 years that are based on all of this scientific research. So we are kind of in a golden age where we have the opportunity to get this right, but there are political and social forces that push back against it. So I think Dr. van der Kolk's message is to keep an eye and advocate and educate, which I hope this kind of qualifies as that education, like edutainment area of the topic. And Curator 101, I'm glad that you could come in and join us too. We're just going to do a presentation and then some open discussion. So I hope you're able to stay and join us. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, great to hear your voice too. Love it. And I don't see anything in chat there unless I see a message from you. Hey, was there anything we should focus on there, or everything good?
No, simulations is just helping out in Twitch that I'm terrible at, and making sure that we're streaming to the right places. So thank you, Sim.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, thanks for that. I'm excited to hear about that, some Twitch action.
Yeah, you are on Twitch now, and hopefully labeled in a way that maybe other VR chatters are getting some visibility on now.
My goodness. Yeah, this is what I love so much about like getting together as a community, because these are the fun things that we can get involved in on Twitch now too. That's wonderful. Yeah, so kind of once again, if you think about where these front lines of PTSD policy and all this funding and just the validation of PTSD as an ailment, to be classified as, for false memories, I think we do have a society that's starting to push back on like victim blaming. I think there's no better description of that than the whole like "what were you wearing" argument of the 1980s. Someone actually did an exhibit called "What Were You Wearing" to sort of parody like the ridiculousness and just kind of the gaslighting to it didn't happen or it wasn't as bad as you're making it out to be. I think there's been a lot of really effective pushes against that, but of course almost maybe nothing more groundbreaking than PTSD being officially put in the DSM-3, where we first saw it there. That opened the door for so many combat veterans at first to start getting like really serious treatments for the struggles that come with PTSD. But also on the topic of chapter 12 and chapter 11, this concept of repressed memory being used in a legal sense. So you can imagine these traumatic memories, that don't really have a coherent narrative and sort of come in these kind of flashes, and they're difficult to talk about because in the triggered state, it's hard to really find the words. But, in a court of law where you're testifying to this memory, there's cases where it supports it, and there's cases that rule against it. So, it's still kind of in the legal limbo of whether or not repressed memories are like admissible in court. And, that's another area that Dr. van der Kolk has firsthand experience in. He's testified as expert witnesses in cases for repressed memory. And I thought he did a good section on the difference between traumatic memory and kind of normal memory. Like we talked about last week, where it sort of takes a stimulus to have a memory. Like if it's mundane, like if you went on a walk in a park, you probably don't retain details of that walk if it's a walk that you take quite often. But if you saw a Baltimore Oriole in that brilliant orange kind of iridescent glow that they have in the sunset, that might be a memory because, lo and behold, that's really exciting to see. So we maintain these kind of stimulated experiences, like getting an award, or our children, first birthdays or graduations, wedding days. These often are very vivid memories for us. But they also tend to lack like the visceral kind of memories, like sounds and smells, what people might have been wearing, which might not count for wedding day. I'm sure we remember what we were wearing. And but like if I smell cake, like it doesn't immediately like take me back to my wedding, where I'm like suddenly there and seeing all these flashes. And they also have a very linear format. You can kind of remember the beginning to the end of that experience. Where in contrast, a traumatic memory, that's typically a life-threatening event where your body actually gets overwhelmed to the point that biologically you don't process the memory with all of the cortisol and the kind of the defense hormones and shutting down. You don't kind of push that memory through the hippocampus and other parts of the brain that are important for building, and recollecting in a coherent way. And these visceral recollections are very vivid with a traumatic memory, like the smell of alcohol. Have you ever been in like a party house where it has that sort of smell of like stale beer that's been soaked into the carpet or the hardwood floors? Like you might know the smell I'm talking about because it's a traumatic smell, even if you didn't have trauma around it. Burning, any kind of like burning plastic smell, clothing patterns, like a specific pattern of shirt or something. These are things that can be very vividly recalled, even though it might have happened like 10, 20, 30 years ago. And the nonlinearity, it's like a Martin Scorsese movie where you're seeing like the past and the future sort of play out in these random ways, and you don't really have the beginning and the end. You just kind of know something happened, and this was part of it, this was part of it, but there's no real like linear narrative to it. And Dr. van der Kolk takes us into Nancy's story, which, oh my goodness, I was not prepared for this part. We're actually in the chapters of the book now that I'm reading for the first time, and I didn't know this was coming, but Nancy had a surgery where she underwent anesthesia, but she had that really super rare experience where she became aware but had been paralyzed, because of the drugs and the anesthesia that she was on. So she experienced a full tubal ligation, completely aware and unable to move through the surgery. And I can't think of many more things horror movie than that right there. And what a brave person to also include the experience in the book too, for it to be something to help us learn, because she had the traumatic memory experience and was able to describe it very vividly to Dr. Vanderkolk, where she had these flashbacks that she was dismissing as dreams. So her body shut down to the extent that even though she experienced it, after the experience, it was coming back like it was a dream. And she could remember the medical conversations of the doctors. Like one of the doctors was joking about a date or something like during the surgery, and she remembered these conversations. So it kind of helped prove, that she was conscious, because she actively recollected things that were said. The color of blue, like that turquoise kind of Scrubs color, just absolutely made her feel nauseous if she saw it. She lost 23 pounds in 3 weeks, which is a lot of weight. That's you look like a totally different person in 3 weeks with that kind of weight loss. And then get this, so she actually worked at the hospital. So when she returned to work after the surgery, she literally went back to where it happened and was surrounded by the sounds and the smells, the routines, the colors, the people. It's like the perfect storm of awful. And one of the things that she said really helped was the talk therapy. Kind of like we talked about last week, was the ability to sort of verbally connect the experience, kind of reorganizes the way the brain processes it to more of a linear narrative, and more of a kind of a traditional memory recollection. And she was kind of a first person account of the talk therapy really helping to sort of unlock what this was doing to her life. And as you would have it, her luck, man, she had to have a second surgery. I don't know, in this case, the book didn't really mention, I think, what the surgery was for, but she, had to go through a second surgery. And in this case, Dr. Vanderkolk actually went with her to the surgery, and fortunately, this one, was a success. And she credited the exercise, the Pilates exercise, as being a big part of the recovery. That not only the community support of the Pilates experience, it's a very kind of help your partner and let's get together and do self-care kind of a community, but also the physical moving of, this kind of release of energy. She credited that as sort of reintegrating. We talked about how trauma can sort of separate your mind and your body, and this was a process of reintegration. She ultimately felt she had to leave a therapist that practiced CBT, or what's commonly known as cognitive behavioral therapy, and went and saw a psychodynamic therapist, which she felt was a big help. And I actually kind of echo her sentiment here, because when I started to see therapists about, I want to say maybe 20 years ago now, CBT was the trend at the time. It was sort of this new CBT is going to fix the world kind of excitement around it. And it sort of really never landed for me. And I want to be careful that I don't, kind of sit up here and discredit something that does work for people and has, scientific studies to back it. So I'm just talking about my personal experience and not what a professional would recommend here. But one of the core aspects of CBT is concentrating on your thought patterns and the adjustment of kind of moving from a negative line of thinking to a more productive and positive line of thinking. And then that positive line of thinking informs your behaviors, which also informs your emotions. And then it sort of has this sort of snowball effect where, if you sort of adjust your thought pattern, then you can, walk yourself into or out of, something like a depression because you're getting into a more positive energy. And my struggle with that is like, if you're experiencing trauma, it's a very, there's a huge body component to it. So your emotions can come like from your body where, you're remembering these triggers and you're having to deal with, these reactions that you have to, otherwise kind of benign average situations. And that emotion that comes from the body is not something you can just tell or think away. And that's where I kind of struggled with CBT therapy, because it was like, I'm not volunteering to have these thoughts. They're sort of, they come from a mood, and I don't really have the skills to like understand these moods. So for me, what worked was more like a somatic approach, which is more of a focus on the process of having these trauma triggers, these fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. And what worked better for me was when I started to understand the mechanics of that more, it allowed me to start recognizing like real time, like while it was happening. And if that is the point at which like a cognitive behavioral therapy can sort of step in, that's where you start to have the practice of, I can decide whether or not I want to allow myself to be affected or to react to this situation. Maybe dropping a glass and breaking a favorite glass or something. Obviously nobody enjoys something like that happening, but if you have some trauma around, parents overreacting when something like that happened, sometimes that can trigger you into a trauma state. But if you recognize the process, now you can sort of decide like, it really is just a glass that can be replaced. I can always remember my little emotional attachments to it. Like, I don't have to like make this the end of the world. So maybe that's like sort of the cognitive behavioral side of the therapeutic approach. But for me, I had to understand the somatic kind of operation of how like the limbic system reacts to different scenarios and how it can be reprogrammed if you have experienced trauma. And, with that, it was kind of a short chapter for me because I thought chapter 11 and chapter 12 like really sort of complemented one another. So they sort of covered a lot of the same ground. And I hope I was able to successfully pick out like the nuggets there that were interesting. But for our inspirational quote for the day, I thought was very fitting. Nothing is more responsible for the good old days than a bad memory. I really enjoyed finding that one because it's super funny. Yeah, and with that, let's go ahead and take the conversation, chapter 12, into open discussion. So I see we already got some hand raises. I'm excited for that. And KT, if I could get the camera over to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Camera isn't necessary, but if you want to. I didn't actually do that on purpose, but I did have I had to get up and let Gracie out. She was barking like crazy. But I think a point I want to make here is that the point behind the body keeps the score is that the memory a trauma can be stored physically in the body as opposed to in the brain. And not saying there's nothing in the brain, but the problem with talk therapies is that they're caught up more in thoughts, and they don't address the physical symptoms and the physical memories. And so, as I think we'll see as we go through the book, there are a lot of other treatment methods that deal with what's going on physically, like somatic processing. And I don't think CBT is bad at all. I'm not in that camp, but I do think it has its limits. And safety is one of the big aspects of the somatic side that kind of opens up the whole process for treatment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can think of an example in one of the earlier chapters too, where somebody that had trauma was prescribed like a massage therapy, and kind of comedically, when the massage started, they sort of had their eyes closed and asked, when was the massage going to start, even though it had already started, because they'd lost that set. So yeah, I do agree that with all of the evidence that the book shows about how the body sort of stores and reprocesses trauma differently, it affects the amygdala, like how much hyper awareness you keep of situations that can be exhausting. Some type of physical exercise or therapy, it's I think really helpful to be aligned with that. So I completely agree with you. A CBT needs sort of a somatic component along with it to really encompass the whole experience.
And massage therapists will tell you that they'll be working on a client and start working on a particular body part, and the person will break out, crying or tense way up or have some sort of reaction, and can then describe somewhat what's going on. Maybe not always give a real coherent description. It could be real disorganized, but they can definitely tap into those memories as they're doing the massage. So the massage therapist can tell you all kinds of tales about that. And yeah, dancing is a good one.
Yeah, I saw George Brand was typing a comment in there, and as dancing being, a form of exercise, because exercise is such a loaded word, right? We think we have to go to a gym and we have to lift weights, but exercise is just walking around the neighborhood, checking out what birds are out singing, and to be a VR advocate here, there's a huge dance community in VR. There's, almost daily dance parties for different kinds of music in VR, and they have the full body tracking, so your avatar can literally represent your moves one for one. So how about that for Body Keeps the Score 2, a whole chapter on how to use VR for somatic exercises that help trauma. Yeah, thanks, KT. That was really insightful. And this is our Good Thursday. We got Carl here, so I got you up on the board there. Carl, take it away.
Yes, thank you. Well, as usual, I had a lot of thoughts as you were presenting, and I'm going to try to remember some of them. When at the beginning, we're talking about the way they were treating cases of PTSD or not treating, post. That was World War II specifically, right? It reminded me a lot of everything lately is reminding me of work, because that's been so much for me, but kind of the idea of a confirmation bias, the decide, oh, this person's, shell shocked or whatever the term they're using, and they, apply electroshock therapy or something extreme like that, and they're like, oh, well, the behavior changed. Like he's not like that anymore. It's like, well, no, you didn't fix him. You kind of just made it worse. And it kind of reminds me of like at work, I'm just trying to like diagnose what's wrong with the computer, and somebody will like come and bring me something, and they're like, oh, well, I did this and this, but now it's, doing this. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's earlier in tests. So that means you probably put it back together wrong. The action you took, like, yeah, it made a change, but it wasn't the change we wanted. We went backwards. We're not making progress here. So you kind of, it's not just about knowing, kind of to what you're saying, Katie. It's not just about like, if then cause and effect, like it really takes that holistic kind of all encompassing, actually caring for the individual and tailoring a treatment that's going to be specific to, their needs, which, a lot of folks don't want. They just want the recipe, the step 1, step 2, step 3 to fix this problem, and then you move to the next one. But I think, we've kind of, come to more towards that point and learned that in the modern times. But I was even thinking about like, when you were talking about that, it's often brought up as like a kind of comical fun fact, but it's kind of horrific to me, really, the idea of like, just even like, so the term like hysterectomy, or hysteria coming from, women who were being crazy, and they would like, oh, we need to scoop out all them woman parts to get you to chill out. And it's like, whoa, and now that's just become like people say like, oh, you're being hysterical or something. And it's just like, puts that whole history into my mind, of like, oh, that's a whole load of things you just brought up there. But, it's often not something that's able to be called out in the moment, but I always think it, Yeah, there's a bunch of my thoughts. Do with them what you will.
Yeah, well, the first thing is I just want to say really appreciate you sharing, because that was, that I think that's something that does need to be called out more and more, is the sort of the bias and the gaslighting, the power dynamics that there are to, traumatic healing is, I think society falls into the trap of often feeling like it's inconvenient for us to deal with, the extra support that is needed for somebody experiencing trauma. So there's all these techniques to sort of minimizing it, or, basically asking people, can you put that aside while we take care of this real quick? And then, once I'm gone, you can bring that back out if you want. It's like this sort of inconvenience, and there's a lot of politics and social power dynamics around who is allowed to even get treatment. Like you said, like there can be family dynamics. That's just how women are. Like these are the kinds of statements that sort of reinforce this. This power to access, traumatic, validation and healing. So I do hope
because
that
I could almost
sit down.
Yeah, because I may be like, imagining a memory, or maybe I've seen it in media or something, but I do feel like I've seen someone use, like, reverse the justification there and kind of say like, oh, like, women are crazy. That's why hysterical is based on the medical process of, treating a woman for yada yada. And it's like, well, no, that's the other way around. Like, that's the language is, othering and reinforcing this wrong idea. That shouldn't be your justification for believing it. That's basically just saying, it is the way it is because it is.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the social media platforms have been a bit of an equalizer too, like, even though they're kind of a show. one of those certain types of shows. They also have these like juicy groups where it's sort of like the script is reversed, where it makes fun of the kind of the alpha male like persona, and it sort of brings the same derogatory humor and stereotypes like to that kind of a personality. And I think to some degree it's kind of leveling the playing field because it pops the bubble of the reverse of the stereotype, right? Like when you can see it like in a different reverse format, it sort of forces you to question the validity of like the other side. So I really do love these kind of extreme parody versions of like other archetype personalities.
Yeah, I've never really been able to name why parody is one of my favorite kind of genres, and that might be kind of getting at it there. It's a call-out method. It's a way to reflect, bad things back at people in a kind of humorous, gentle-ish way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, parody is almost like the antidote to propaganda, because it just deconstructs the fallacies of.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And we got Haya up next on the board here. If it's okay, I'm going to send the camera over. Yeah, good to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you for all the amazing work you keep putting into this and all the comments and people present. There are a few things kind of going in order of your presentation. The visceral nature of what you were talking about today. I was really surprised that World War II affected only 13%. There's a part of me that wants to dig at that because it was called World War II, not tiny amount of people World II. I think that line. Yeah, I'm very skeptical of that measurement of how people were affected. I don't know anybody from that generation when I've met or talked to them that weren't deeply affected by it. So I'm guessing that had to do with some level of like catastrophically displaced or,
what's the metric?
Direct exposure to, deaths, events that could have altered or killed them or something. I don't know, but that was interesting. It feels like a macro level manifestation about how we minimize the effects of trauma, where it's being like, only if you lost a limb or loved one were you affected by this. And yet, I still have interacted with generations from World War II. I'm affected by World War II through my grandfather, who was in it and had behaviors in him that I didn't understand until after he died, why he could just flip a switch and be so completely cruel and inhumane. That being said, also the story about the surgery, in some of my own personal healing work, I once was invited to do a role play exercise, not with another. So, there's a concept in healing work called drama therapy or shadow work, where we conjure up people from our past and we have somebody play that person, acting in kind of that really hard moment the way they acted, so we can kind of face that differently with new support around us. But there's also the role play I was presented with, which I think somebody just made up, but it was super powerful for everyone involved, is we got to role play with a chosen part of our body. And I decided to role play with my lungs. And so somebody sat in front of me and was like, "Hi, I'm your lungs. What do you want to say to me?" And I found myself getting really angry at my lungs as I started to just try to like have a have a statement to say to them. I grew up very, very ill and like not medicated the way I needed to be. And so I had deep, like chronic desperateness for oxygen growing up. And I was surprised to feel this kind of roar coming out of me, my lungs, like, all you did was drown me. You'd never worked right. Why? And I was, everybody was kind of like, whoa, she's getting really into this. But the thing about shadow work is sometimes you switch places. And so that person then became me and I became the lungs, and they kind of yelled at me. And I looked at this person yelling at me and I was just like, what are you doing? Like, I've been drowning with you. Like, I'm in it too. And you being angry with me just made everything worse, and that conversation with that part of my body, it was absurd in the moment to some degree, just how much emotion was there from both directions. But because I felt so sad as my lungs looking at this person that had just projected all of this stuff on me, that I was really doing my best to keep them alive, and but I remember driving home that night and subsequent weeks of feeling that anger, sadness response in my own body, and realizing how tangled I had been with kind of this self-blame towards my body through, 20 years of my life. And then all of a sudden I had kind of gotten to feel it from both directions. And I stopped. I don't know, if you think about growling when you're angry, it's kind of this crunching down and squeezing your rib cage together. And I just stopped being so hard that way inside of me. I just remembered like trying to push the air out to let it go instead of growl it out. And over time, my lungs actually healed way further than any conventional medicine could predict they could. And I think a lot of that was really deep grief work that followed over the next 5 or 6 years, where I got to kind of go back through my flashbacks and remember all these very painful moments. And instead of just feeling that lostness, really just having a ton of compassion that I would reach, kind of wrap around myself, of going, wow, to be a child in this state of depravity I wouldn't wish this on any living entity. So there's a lot of, I know I'm a living example of what healing can come when we have a conversation with the parts of our bodies we think are betraying us or letting us down. And really, they're the safest place we could put all that discord. And so that's the second piece. And the last piece is the cognitive behavioral therapy. Actually, the graphic you had up there, I don't know if you can switch back to that slide, I think is the key for why everybody kind of delicately dances around, well, this technically has the most evidence, science, etc. It's not called cognitive emotional behavioral therapy. And yet the entire theory is based off of the trifecta of the balance of these three things. And I believe what's happening here, that I've always snagged around, and I have been a recipient, and I have also been taught some level of how to do this kind of work, is that the emotions are suppressed and they're minimized, and they are seen as a accidental side effect of the interaction between the thoughts and behaviors. And so really, as you can see in the hierarchy of that graphic, the thoughts are what are emphasized. Let's change your thoughts and your behaviors will change. And that's a very kind of, Western and also path psychopathology and compartmentalization and masculine in its most unconscious kind of patriarchal form perspective of our humanity. And I believe in a way, a kind of reenactment of the systemic trauma that disregards emotions as hysterical and as as a leakage when something's going wrong. It's like emotions are supposed to be like oil in the system, in our car system. And if you see it, then something's wrong. You should never see your emotions. And that to me is just, as you had as your slide last week, you know, we've called it culture and then we call it fact, but it's really just a manifestation of a lot of unprocessed grief turned into a systemic therapy that can, I believe that CBT is so lauded or popular because it was the easiest therapy to measure. And so then it had some evidence behind it because it's a very short amount of tools that can be presented to somebody. But I look at it personally and professionally as a, you know, medic on the field that sticks a tourniquet on your leg because you're going to bleed out. And then technically you're not bleeding out anymore. So yay, you're good to go now. Pick up your gun and keep shooting. But that doesn't work, you know? and I've worked with a lot of people who found it very helpful in the beginning and were, you know, ushered off after 10 sessions and whatever. And then the fallout from that is that the emotions have not been integrated or processed. And so they turn into a cesspool of shame and a whole new level of suppressing, feeling very broken and like I didn't do it right because I'm using the same cognitive exercises and targeting myself to try to not become so upset or dysfunctional, and it's working less and less. And so I think there's a systemic misuse of this out of budgeting, scarcity, and whatever else that I don't say that as a blanket piece. I think medics on the field are really important, but the unfortunate piece is the therapists who end up practicing that many times. There was a study that came out that said they surveyed a massive amount of therapists and they said, what therapy do you, if you ever go to therapy, what do you choose for yourself? And they had them rank them in a hierarchy of like ones you would pick over others. CBT for all the therapists was on the very bottom. and that, you know, I was in a class when we were discussing this and it was like, doesn't that say something that we can't stand the idea of taking the medicine that we're doling out and saying this is the right way to go? It just feels problematic to me. And mostly my interactions in the days as a practitioner were undoing a lot of this stuff because it really, CBT works for individualistic society because it does kind of re-empower a person by saying you can change yourself and then you'll be better in your world. And it doesn't necessarily acknowledge or really sit with the complexity of our environment and how much it does shape us and explore the emotions that are incredibly vulnerable and subjective and messy and don't have a linear path to healing.
Yeah, really, really well said. And before I forget, I want to, I'd love to write a book with that title. World War II was not tiny war world people. I forget the way that you said it, but it was like really.
It was World War.
Tongue twister.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna like go back to the tape to that string of words because it was a real tongue twister, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, thank you for sort of bringing that context to CBT as well. Like CBT is like sort of that. To me, it's just that like get over it kind of sector of the healing process. And there's this really famous Bob Newhart skit where a young lady comes to him as a psychiatrist in the skit, and she's like expressing I have these like unreasonable fears that I can't stop thinking about, and he's like, oh, I'll fix this in 5 minutes. He's like looking at his watch, and he just leans over and goes, stop it.
That's real. It's comedy, but that is a type of intervention. And
right.
I think that, yeah, I appreciate your humor, but I definitely have a flame in me. Maybe the anger I felt towards my lungs, I feel destruction instead. But it's just like, the thing is that's funny to imagine two people who are equal. But when you start to think about what that person represents in saying stop it, it becomes much more horrific to realize that somebody would use their power that way to summarize an entire human being's experience as just don't do it. Just don't believe that and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Just don't let that thought happen. And
that's
one of those areas where the kernel of truth that makes it funny is a little overpowering, even to the joke. And I also appreciate what you shared, and I kind of want to come back to it a little bit too, because we talk about creating like brave spaces too, like, so not just safe spaces but brave spaces, and you brought up anger, which I honestly feel like it's a very avoided topic, like the amount of angry emotion that comes from traumatic experiencing, because over time, especially if you experience something as a child and then you're able to reflect on it as an adult, and you start to realize like, wow, I should have also never even have been in that situation. And there were people that like knew I was in that situation and still like allowed this to occur, and didn't provide support. And that can go to a really angry place, and it's not unjustified anger. And as a society, we really frown on anger. I think when there's explosive behavior in public, like, we even have the police to deal with, like, hey, somebody's blowing their top, can you put a stop to that? We don't really have a healthy outlet for anger, and I think that's one of the reasons, like, it does kind of boil over a lot in our society, and we have these really acute, like, destructive, violent outbursts of anger, because we sort of banished like anger from the discussion. And what I really loved about the experience you shared is like, if I heard correctly, it was like there was this anger towards the lungs for like, not operating and making life very uncomfortable and difficult. But when the emotion was like seen objectively from another angle, it was like, wow, like I'm really sort of aiming my anger at a spot that, like actually was in it with me. like who we, that's, I think that mind-body separation even that we kind of talk about in the book. So like to have that reintegration type of experience, if I was really catching like what you talked about it, and that it was with anger, one of the most like challenging and explosive emotions that can come from trauma. Really thank you for bringing that like into the discussion. That I feel that was really poignant, and I'm glad it's out there now. We can discuss anger.
Yeah, thank you for hearing that. And the third thing I want to say about this, because it wasn't just me with one other person. There was a group of people surrounding me in that. And I knew those people really well. And from both directions, I experienced embarrassment at the emotion coming out of me. But I also felt secure enough to let that be bigger and let it out. And I knew what they were feeling watching this. It was like a horror episode. They knew what I had gone through, and they were like, you're angry at your lungs? And then your lungs are victimized and feeling really sad by your, like they were just feeling a lot of compassion and sadness to see this tangle that was embedded inside of me. And what's important to me about naming that circle story is how important it is to have people available to hold that witness that we didn't have. You know, they're not bystanders. They're holding a circle there with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful, like kind of community support. Yeah, there's so many layers of I think that, you know, watching the stream and kind of reflecting on this, you know, we can take away from that. Super important. And yeah, we got all our, yeah, thank you too. I think we got all our hand raises on the board all set, but you know, we still got a little bit of time to work with. I want to welcome T. Gupta. So glad to see you. I hope you got those custom pink hearts still with that avatar. And Bonnie, I'm so glad that you could make it too. Really good to see you there. And Crescent Dawn, welcome. I don't believe we've met, but I'm so happy that you could come in. It's good to see you there, your avatar. We're just kind of going through the open discussion section of Chapter 12 on Dr. Vanderkolk's Body Keeps a Score book. Lots of juicy nuggets came up. And yeah, just want to do check in on anyone that wants to share. Hand raises. The floor is open. If not, I hope I didn't miss any typed messages from you, George Braham. I saw dancing, and I saw you relating to Ruth's comment in some ways too. So I did see some of your typed messages there. Thanks for speaking up for the nonverbal parts of VR. You know, even if you don't have a microphone, you can participate here, and I love that about VR. Well, great. I'll go in once here, go in twice, and if there's no further comments, yeah, let's consider that a nice successful wrap to Chapter 12. And we'll be here again next week with Chapter 13, where we actually start getting into the aspects of how to kind of start a healing path. If you feel like you want to, you know, tackle processing some trauma that you may suspect you have faced, these next chapters are going to go into that. So I'm really looking forward to this next section of the book and what Dr. Vanderkolk has to say. So yeah, thank you.
And I think on your last slide, you had the RSVP section. So maybe go back to that. We have so many amazing people showing up, and yeah, Scott has now put this fancy little reminder of how to give back if you found value in this event. That's a screenshot of our Discord, and where you can RSVP to get reminders about it. But it also helps us know which events to keep going and which events to prioritize. So would love your...
a little wrinkle that I'd like to mention there, that I love promoting it during the event, but then the way that Sesh works, while the event is in progress, the next one hasn't been posted yet. We got to make sure folks know to look out for the post at the end time of this event, which would be here in like 12 minutes.
Yeah. Unless they RSVP and set up continual reminders.
Then you don't have to worry about it.
Then you don't ever have to go back, and you'll get direct messages that will tell you when the event's going to happen at whatever time you want to be reminded. So, yeah. Good point, though. That is I can't even edit events while they're going on, so to speak. It locks me out, so it's annoying.
Yeah.
But thank you, Scott. And do you have a sense of next week what we're covering, or did you already?
Yeah, I'll actually be reading this chapter along with the community here. So I'm going to be discovering it real time. And I just do know that it's focusing more on like the restorative advice and aspects of healing.
Awesome. And our next Bridgemakers event, which is just a custom we do when we get to the end of events these days, should be tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific time. We have our community builder check-in, where we do a circle of conversation on community building pain points. Like, you bring just some kind of ache, if you can, on what's not going well for you in building community. And then the second hour, we go on a world hop and we ask ourselves questions about how the worlds shape our community experience. Yeah, I hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Yeah, I'll turn the volume back to normal here. And again, thanks for everybody's presence. Wonderful event.
Awesome.
Kind of like the volume on with a small group like this. We can kind of easily just
now we all have to get close to each other to share and talk.
Whoa, what?
Like, what? Yeah. Now it's a circle.
Whoa.
Look at that.
Whoa.
I need to find this post I saw. I thought of you while I was scrolling through my phone, but it was somebody like arguing for they made a ball pit